Good morning and welcome. Before I go any further, would you please raise your hand if you can see me? So that is your Zoom hand. No point raising your actual hand because I can't see you. Super duper. Thank you very much. I'm Sir Taylor. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining me. I'm now going to share my screen again and get back to my PowerPoint presentation. I'd like to inform you of a little bit of the admin side of things before we do begin. And that is, as I've already mentioned, I can't see you and I can't hear you. All I have is a list of attendees. So whatever name you happen to have on your Zoom account, that's what I see and nothing more. This event is recorded and I do often share the recordings on YouTube or via the Sir Taylor platform for clients. So you may need to keep that in mind if you decide to contribute. We do have people on my program from various parts of the country. I'll name but a few, just so you're aware. We have a lot from Slough, Hounslow, West Middlesex generally, because that is where the company originated. But we also have clients from as far afield as Cardiff, Manchester, Birmingham, Hampshire, Kent, Essex, East London generally, and quite a lot from Sutton as well, and Leicester. So what I'm going to say to you actually applies. It does not matter where in the country you are, as long as you're a parent. I believe that what I intend to share with you will be of interest to you and perhaps of benefit. I hope so. There will be a Q&A once I've finished my presentation, and that is usually the most interesting part, as long as people have some questions, because those questions are asking things that you yourself might think, oh, yes, that's interesting, or I wish I'd asked that. And it's the way it works. Question and answer is one of the most powerful learning methods, and we use it to the absolute max in our courses, which of course is only possible because we have small groups of children. I will be using this PowerPoint. There are quite a few slides, but they're mainly to remind me of things I want to share with you. So I try to keep the text down on most slides. Some of what I have are video clips, and they're all public property. They're all available on YouTube. There are a couple of anecdotes which I think help to bring to life some of the points that I make. And at one or two points during the presentation, I might ask for a show of hands, and it works better for you if you do participate if requested. And this is the way it works also for children when they're learning. If they're participating, they're engaged more fully and they gain more. So sound educational principles all the way through, as in our courses. Now I'm going to begin without further ado, and I have an awful lot that I do want to say to you, so forgive me. There's a lot packed in and it does take time to do it, but I will keep it as quick and brief as I can. So settle in and here we go. It is called 11+ education for parents. Most parents underestimate how important their own education is about 11+ and schooling, but generally education to their children's education. And I hope that by the end of this event, you will be better informed why it is that your education is so important and why it is that I sit here one Sunday morning every month trying to help to educate parents. So why are you here? Well, you must have a good reason, because you've given up a busy Sunday morning when you could be doing many other things to keep me company. Well, I presume, and I am making an assumption, that it is because you want to do your best for your children, because being here shows a lot of dedication. And if that's not why you're here, then you're probably in the wrong place and I'm going to waste your time. Now, one of the messages which I put out in preparation for today was that some parents, they're actually obstructing their children's education without meaning to. Of course, no parent is actually intending to do that, but many are in practice doing that, if not all or almost all without meaning to do it. And it's to do with not being aware of unintended consequences. And partly that's what I'm addressing here today. So again, I'm going to ask a series of questions. You know, are you getting in the way of your child's education? I mean, we all should be curious about that as parents. And I'm speaking as a parent as well as an educator. Well, okay, so here's one question for you to think on. What do you praise your child for? We all do praise our children, and praise is neither good nor bad. It does depend on how we give it and what we praise. So what do you praise your child for? Who do you compare them to? Now, this is just a fact. We tend to compare. It's just a part of our natures. We tend to compare things, compare people, compare our children. What about feelings? We'll come back to that. What proportion of education do you believe occurs in school or university or nursery? What proportion of education do you think occurs in formal education establishments? Is grammar school good for your child? If so, what's important for their learning when it comes to preparing for grammar school? These are questions which I have found warrant answers, but are often not asked by parents themselves and not answered. Well, I think that during the course of this presentation, you will probably, well, be able to answer these questions for yourself, but also understand why I'm asking these questions. Why are these important questions to be asking yourself and answering? And we'll come back to them towards the end. Which does bring us to why I am here. Well, I'm here to share my expertise and insights with you so that you can make better choices, more informed choices. You'll be hopefully more informed, better educated about education in general, but 11 plus in particular. So I say, give yourself a chance. I'm going to share some important insights, probably quite a lot, and some might sting at first, which is to say that you might not quite like them. But I ask you reflect on them and your children might reap the reward. So let's not have the knee jerk. Give it time to sink in, and then you'll have an opportunity to feel better informed and make better decisions. Now, before anything else, let's address this thing about feelings, because that was one of my questions. What about feelings? Well, number one, beware, you are not your feelings. I'm going to play a short video clip, and then I'll speak briefly again about it after.
It's also important to remember that you are not your feelings. One of the most important things that you can learn from this book, and more importantly for life, is that you are not your feelings. Your feelings are there to give you an example of how you could react, but that doesn't mean you have to act in that way. So remember, you do not have to act on your feelings. When you understand that your feelings are just suggestions for how you could act in a situation and not what you have to do, you will become unstoppable.
Short and simple, and yet most people get this wrong. If you teach your child that they are not their feelings, but that feelings are simply events that take place inside their bodies and their minds, and that they do not have to be driven by their feelings, they don't have to make their choices based upon their feelings, because they are not their feelings, that is a very powerful life lesson for your child. Very simple. You can implement that immediately. Why should you heed me even if you don't like what I say? Well, I am motivated to educate and not by profit. For example, we teach in small groups because this is the most effective for learning. I've already mentioned this and I'll mention it again, but it is very bad for making profits. And that is why most companies don't teach in small groups, because they're in it for the money. When I say small groups, I'm talking about less than 10. So if you see more than 10 in a room, you've got to say, this isn't really about education. I am therefore in a position to tell you what you need to know, because I'm not trying to make profits from you. Who am I? Well, you know, things I'm going to share with you, you need to know where I'm coming from. So here we go. My name is actually Sudhir, and Taylor is my actual surname. I was born in Kenya, and when I was very little, we went to India, and then when I was 7, we came to this country. So I am an immigrant. Hands up if you are an immigrant, if you were not born in this country, please. Oh, 1 or 2. Okay, usually a large proportion. Okay, all right, thank you very much. I'm going to lower all hands. We always have immigrants here. And, you know, it's a thing. Immigrant populations tend to work that little bit harder and not take education for granted. And I admire that, and I share that value. I am a dad to 2 daughters. I always feel compelled to prove that. There they are. Kavita on the left, she's now 23, and Nilam on the right, she's 27. So back to who I am. I have been in the world of teaching and training since 1985. In that time, I did spend 10 years as an officer in the Royal Navy, involved in the training of sailors and officers. And I have been teaching my own 11+ course since 2001, so just over 20 years now. I reckon in my career since 1985 that I've personally taught between 10 and 20,000 people. And I would say it's definitely closer to the 20,000 by now. Though I haven't counted, I'm estimating. And not least, I try to do my bit to make the world a better place for all of us and our children. So that is me in the nutshell. That is who Sir Taylor is. Now, I'm not driven by profit, as I've already mentioned. I'm driven by a vision. This is my vision: to empower people like you and your children, by enhancing their love of and skills in learning and reasoning. This is my vision. In other words, to put it in short, I believe in the power of education to improve the world and people's lives. In essence, I am a teacher. Okay, so this is a rhetorical question, and don't feel obliged to answer, and it's not meant to insult you. Simply this: are you serious about doing the best for your child? Now, of course you are, because you're here. It's all those millions and billions of people who are not here, who perhaps are not as serious as you. Now, you may or may not have heard of Carl Sagan, but he was a scientist, an astrophysicist, and he was the world authority on the search for extraterrestrial life. In other words, is there life in other worlds, or is it just confined to the Earth? And he was the world's expert. He passed away in the 90s. But because he was the expert on the search for aliens, his opinion was very sought after on that subject. And he was always asked by journalists, so, you know, are we alone in the universe? Is there any sign that there's life elsewhere, and so on? So one particular journalist who was trying to get a headline said to him, so are we alone in the universe, or is there life out there? And he gave the scientist's reply, which is, the evidence is not conclusive either way. So the search goes on. So we cannot say what definitely one way or the other. And she was not happy with his response. So she said, but what does your gut tell you? And this was his reply. But I try not to think with my gut. If I'm serious about understanding the world, thinking with anything besides my brain, as tempting as that might be, is likely to get me into trouble. So typically a playful, humorous, but thought-provoking response, a thinking man's response, which is, you know, if you are serious about something, you've got to use your head, not your gut, not instinct, not feelings. And that's essentially what I'm saying, is whenever there are important decisions and choices to be made, it's the brain that needs to be making them, not the gut, not instinct, not feelings. Learning, what is it? Well, it's connections in the brain. New connections in the brain is learning. Learning requires mental work. Those connections don't make themselves. They have to be made. Learning consists of thinking new thoughts and creating new pathways in the brain. That is what learning is. Some new thoughts can be in conflict with some old thoughts. And then you have to think which one makes more sense. What's more logical? What makes better sense? This I call the Pyramid of Flourishing, and it is to help you to understand that, you know, We all want our children to flourish. We want ourselves to flourish. But then there is this pyramid that we need to be aware of, which allows flourishing. There is this thing called mind management, we'll come to very shortly. That is the base layer of the pyramid. And then upon that, mindset is the next layer. And upon that, a layer I call perspective. And then there's 11 plus stuff, or stuff that's specific to whatever it is we're working towards or aiming towards. But it's all based upon mind management, mindset, then having a healthy perspective. And then since we are brought together by 11 plus stuff. And I'm going to split my presentation into these 4 areas and do them in the order of importance, starting with mind management. Here we go. Effective mind management. That is, yours and your child's mind management is critical to your child's flourishing. In other words, your mind management is critical to your child's flourishing. Let's see what this means. Well, there's a few questions here. What are some of the things that you do that you know you should not do, or things that you avoid doing that you know you should do? Now, just think about that. I'm sure we all have these things, by the way, and I'm no exception. What I do, sometimes I eat things that are not good for me. Maybe sometimes I eat too many of those things. Sometimes I spend too many hours sitting in front of the box when thinking, oh, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. Or sometimes, what do I avoid doing? Maybe I avoid exercising as much as I ought to exercise. Maybe there are certain tasks that I procrastinate and put off and put off. These are quite common things. We all have these things. So think of 1 or 2 for yourself, because it'll be useful for you. You're not going to share them, by the way, so it's completely private. But it's good if you have something in your mind. Now, a slightly trickier question. Why is it that you sometimes don't do what you know is the sensible thing to do? In other words, you avoid doing this sensible thing, or you make a choice that is not as sensible for yourself. Why do you sometimes do the thing or not do the thing that you should do? That in your head, there is this little voice that knows that what is sensible and what is not, and you ignore it sometimes. Why is that? Okay, so right now you might be feeling bad about yourself and guilty. That is not my intention. It's just to make a point. It's this little fellow here. Who is your biggest enemy? There he is. That's the culprit. So don't beat yourself up. You are not a bad person. No need to feel guilty about it, because it is this fellow, this chimp. Now, so it's your chimp that's the culprit here when you make poor choices. So that's good news, isn't it? Because it's not you. But the bad news is that if you're unaware of your chimp, then you are in trouble. So here I am trying to help you with that. So what is this chimp thing? Well, your chimp is not an animal that lives outside of your body. It actually is in your head, but is not you. Now, I think probably the best way is not for me to talk to you about the chimp, but to play this clip where I think it's a really nice introduction to it.
There are 3 core tenets to the book. You have a chimp and a human in your head, and they want very distinct things. Your human is a simplified representation of your prefrontal cortex and some other parts of your brain that handle long-term thinking, delayed gratification, emotion control, consideration, and ethics. You also have a chimp in your brain. This is the limbic system and all the older parts of your brain, the parts of your brain that we would have had more in common with a chimp. Steve Peters separates out these parts of the brain and says that they want completely distinct things. They have entirely different motivations. And if you don't understand this and fail to put them in their appropriate places, then you will be forever in conflict within your own mind. This book is extremely simple. It has no flowery words or high concept ideas. It's plain and simple, to the point. You've got 2 dudes in your head, a chimp and a human. They are in conflict. You need to sort out that conflict if you want to have a happy, healthy, long life. And there is great, great power in this simplicity. Anytime you find yourself being overly emotional, reactive, sad, scared, You have to realize that your chimp is acting up. Anytime you feel hurt or jealous, it is the chimp that is in control. Realize that you are not your chimp. The chimp is like a child that you must always look after and that will never grow up. It will always remain the chimp, and you must accept it as it is. Don't control and hate the chimp. Manage and love the chimp. This requires you to listen and give it what it needs. So if the chimp is frightened, you don't just go, shut up, or ignore it, or berate it, or anything like that. You don't ignore your emotions. You don't ignore what your body is telling you. Instead, you listen, and then you find the most logical, rational solution to the problem. You must be a problem solver. And if you don't find solutions that appease the chimp and make the human happy, you will be forever miserable. If you don't make the chimp happy, if you ignore it or try to trick it, then it will take over. Your chimp needs sex, it needs a tribe, it needs love and security, and it needs territory. And you have to give it these things, amongst other things, to avoid internal conflict. You must satisfy its needs, keeping check on it like you would with a small, scared child. If you do this, then it will behave. By separating out the parts of your brain and giving them identities, it allows you to distance yourself from the more base, reactive parts of your mind, and thereby love yourself more. Where once you might say, why the hell do I always get so angry over such small, silly things? I'm such a goddamn loser. You now say, why does this get your back up? And how can we make sure this happens less in the future? What do you need, Jim? I mean, you might or might not say it in a weird, fake American accent. This acceptance of all aspects of yourself is pure liberation. The vast majority of people are completely ruled by their chimps, and they don't even realize it. This makes them act in an angry, petty, possessive, egotistical way. If you keep an awareness of this, then when people act out, it allows you to have more compassion, empathy, and patience with them. You can say, hang on a second, this person is clearly ruled by their chimp. Sure, they may be doing me wrong, but far better to have some slight I can bounce back from in 3 seconds than to have an unruly chimp who is on the clock 24/7, causing mayhem and terror and destroying one's life.
So if you're unfamiliar with your chimp, it probably is and has been making important decisions for you and your family. So the chimp, this is just a mind management model. It's not that there is an actual chimp. It's certain parts of the brain which we have in common with our ancestors. Now, I'm holding up to the camera a book. It's called The Chimp Paradox. And this is the book that was referred to in that clip and will be in 1 or 2 future clips too. I've shown you this book because it's so important. The education of parents is so important to children's education that we issue that book to the parents of all children who are on our 11+ course. Now, it's quite important to know whenever you're making decisions or choices, who it is that's in charge. Is it you or is it your chimp? I mean, they're both inside your skull, they're both in your head, but so it can be tricky to decide or to work out who it is that's in charge at any given moment. Unless you have a sort of a checklist, which is what I'm going to show you. See, we all aspire to the left picture where we're civilized, noble, well-intentioned. It's what we aspire to, but quite often the reality is the chimp. Now, I'm going to make it really simple for you. It's very fortunate, actually. When you know a few little things, it's very easy to know who is in charge. And I'm going to show you in one screen how you can know whether it is you in charge or whether it is your chimp that's in charge at any given moment. So on the left is good, it's you in charge, and on the right, red is bad, it's when the chimp is in charge. So look how easy it is to tell. So you, the good ways to make decisions. When it comes to an important decision, like for example, is grammar school good for your child? Or if you've decided yes, it is for logical reasons, then you would ask, well, how shall I prepare them? what is a good way to prepare them. So the good ways to make decisions are asking questions like, why is this important? What are the facts? And these days, you know, any little topic or big topic that you want to get facts about, you can get endless facts about it, which can be overwhelming. So we ask the questions, which facts matter the most? And then which decision makes the best logical sense? This is the human way of thinking. Now on the right, you know your chimp is in charge. If these are the thoughts going through your mind, the bad ways of making decisions, what are others doing? How will it make me look? What will people think? Do you see all of those are about what others might think, how you might appear to others? What are they doing? So when those are the thoughts going through your head, then you know that's not you, that is your chimp. And of course, what do my urges say? Urges or feelings or gut? That is not you, that is your chimp. So you can take a screenshot, you're most welcome, and you can do that on any part of my presentation. So beware. Right, now think of 1 or 2 goals that you have. Again, completely private, nobody's business but yours. But since they can be, you know, big, ambitious goals, or they can be very little goals. I mean, it might be getting a particular task done today. It could be as simple as that, or it can be some long-term aim that you have. But it's good if you think of something. I mean, for me, a very common one could be to lose a certain amount of weight by a particular time. So for example, by the end of this month, I want to be 3 pounds lighter. That seems like a straightforward goal. So you might have 1 or 2 goals of your own. Raise your hand if you've thought of a goal, whether it's trivial or it's big. Just raise your hand, think of something, because it's better if you have a goal in your mind. You're not going to share it with me. Thank you. Super duper, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to lower all hands now and proceed. So you've got some sort of a goal in your head. Okay. Now, let's think about goals and success. Generally, we say if we achieve our goals, we have succeeded, right? Now, maybe some of you thought of these goals. I don't know. Usually people do when they come to a presentation, which is to do with 11 plus. Getting your child into a grammar school seems like a sensible and noble goal, doesn't it? Or if you already have a child, or you have a school on the doorstep, or you have a child going to a particular grammar school, then maybe getting your child into a particular grammar school, that sounds like success. So that's a sensible goal, isn't it? Well, you know, I'm not going to make it easy for you. So I say wrong on both counts. Now, when I tell you that those are not sensible goals, your chimp, not you, feels indignant and says, how dare you, sir, I'm leaving. Whereas your human is saying, I wonder why he's saying that. What's he getting at? Why aren't those sensible goals? So the human is asking questions. Now, to explain this, I'm going to tell you an anecdote, and you see Rosie has come up on screen. That is to remind me to tell you about Rosie. Rosie was my pupil about 20 years ago for 11 plus, which is when I started doing 11 plus. She used to come to class in Langley Pavilion, where I used to run lessons on a Sunday with a friend whose name I do not now recall. But they used to come together and the families were friends, and sometimes one parent would drop the children off and the other parent would collect them and so on. Anyway, these girls, they sat their exam, I believe it was in 2001. And at that time I lived in Slough, which is where I used to run lessons. And I used to shop at the Co-op, which doesn't exist there now. But so I was pushing my trolley around and I saw ahead of me Rosie's family shopping, and they were quite upbeat, it seemed to me. And when they saw me, they came up to me and greeted me, and the father shook my hand. And I could see that they were in a very upbeat mood. So I asked, you know, what's the celebration? And the father said that, oh, Rosie had done very well in the 11 plus test, and that she would be going to one of the local grammar schools. And I was feeling pretty chuffed about that. The parents obviously gave me some credit for that. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's nice. I'm really glad. And I wished them well, and I carried on shopping. And then down at the end of the aisle, I saw Rosie's friend's family walking along very slowly and looking as if there had been a death in the family. So they looked quite somber. So I went up, so I was concerned what had happened. And the father could barely make eye contact with me. And he said, she didn't get through the 11 plus. And I thought, really, is that the reason why you're behaving as if somebody has died? This is just a test. And so because your daughter, these are the thoughts going on in my head. I didn't say any of these things, but I was appalled, shocked that a parent could be treating their child that way, not realizing that they're scarring their child, not just for that day or that week, that month, but for life, by reacting as if they had, as if it was a death, as if it was a disaster, as if she had failed. And I resolved in that moment. So, you know, my feelings about having played a positive role in Rosie's success suddenly evaporated. And I resolved in that moment that I would do what I can do in order to educate parents not to behave like silly children, and to actually keep a handle on what 11 plus is and what grammar schools are, and about mind management and mindset, especially because they're undermining their children without meaning to. And that's what was happening with Rosie's friend. Her parents were unwittingly undermining their daughter. They were damaging her without meaning to. Well, what is success then if it's not passing the 11 plus and going to the grammar school of your choice and such? What is it? Well, it depends who you ask, depends how you think of it. Is it wealth? Some people think it is. But I think that since COVID arrived, many people have changed their mind and realized actually health is quite important. Is it happiness? I like this slide a lot because I think it reminds me of my childhood. And I think there's a lot of truth in this. There are two things that prevent us from happiness. One, living in the past, and two, observing others. Well, I don't know, but I'm going to play you a little clip to introduce the idea of what sensible goals are.
The book is also great because it talks about how to set effective goals. Because a lot of the times, if you set a goal and don't reach it, you'll feel disappointed with yourself. But there's a way you can avoid this disappointment. And that's by setting a goal that isn't controlled by external factors. For example, you could set a goal of getting a job, but there's no guarantee you're going to get it. However, what if you change your goals to reading up on the job, learning interview techniques, and how to act the part? If you don't get the job, you can still be happy because you've achieved your goals and maximize your chance of getting.
So in that little clip, again, he was referring to the Chimp Paradox when he said in the book. And he also mentioned that sensible goals are goals where they are within your control. Now, the example given here is the goal of getting a particular job. It is not a sensible goal to set that I'm going to get that job. It's okay to aspire to that, but it's not a sensible goal because it's not in your control. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, it is in my control. Well, I'm going to disappoint you. What is in your control? How you prepare for the job, how good your CV is, which jobs you apply for so that you are well qualified and experienced for that role. You look the part, you dress the part, you research the company, you practice your interview techniques. You can do all of that. All of those things are in your control, and great. But whether you get the job or not is not in your control, because that decision is not made by you. That decision is made by somebody else. And that somebody else is unpredictable. I'll give you one simple example of why that person making the decision. If normally you'd have a panel of people, and normally they all have some influence, but there's one person generally who makes the decision. Now, supposing that person who makes the decision could see that on paper, you're a really great candidate, maybe even the best candidate, what have you, but something within them says no, and they themselves may not know what it is, but it could be something like you subconsciously, i.e. beneath the threshold of consciousness, remind them of somebody else with whom or about whom they don't have good feelings. So they themselves are not sure why it is they're saying no to you. And there's no chance of you ever knowing, or even the other people on the panel knowing. And you don't get the job, somebody else does. So it is a delusion if you think that you are in control of decisions that other people make. And getting a particular job is a decision made by other people, not you. So you can do all the good stuff like reading up on the job, learning interview techniques, and all of that. But in the end, getting the job is not within your control, and that is why it is not a sensible goal. So sensible goals are ones which are within your control. So let's talk about 11 plus and what is sensible goal. I've already said that passing the 11 plus or getting into a particular grammar school, those are not sensible goals. And for the same reason, because they are not in your control. They're not in your child's control. And even though I'm a professional in 11 plus and have been since 2001, it's not even in my control. Now, let's explain why. Yes, your child can work hard. Yes, you can get the best tuition that money can buy, which is yours truly. But none of that is certainty that your child would do well in the exam or that you will get a particular grammar school. Well, why not? Well, I'm going to tell you a couple of anecdotes now. Tell you, one is about me. My first sign that I might be getting ill is not a runny nose or a headache or a temperature that I can detect, but that I have difficulty remembering my times tables or doing simple mental arithmetic. And of course, in my profession, these are things that I'm very adept at because I'm teaching them to the children amongst a million other things. So when I'm unable to do simple arithmetic or remember my times tables instantly, I think, wait, something's wrong. And I think either I didn't sleep well or I'm getting slightly ill. Now, there is nothing in the world that you or anybody else can do to prevent your child having one of those days on the day of the exam. It does not matter how well you look after your child, how much you do in order to help them to be well or to get a normal night's sleep on the day of the exam. Whether or not they are able to focus to their capability on the day of the exam is out of the control of anybody and everybody. And you are deluded if you think that is in your control or your child's control. Now you can imagine that if your child is unable to focus fully, either because they didn't sleep well or because they were distracted by something or because they're getting slightly ill, there can be a million reasons for it, they are not going to be able to perform to their capability. And that can make a huge whopping difference to how they do in the test. And it is completely beyond your control. That's just one thing. Here's another. I mentioned before about parents unwittingly undermining their children. I had a pupil called, what was his name? Nick Hill. And this was back in about 2001, to the best of my memory. And he was a very able boy. He was probably the top boy in his primary school, and he was one of the strongest candidates on my 11 plus program, and which he took in his stride, and everybody expected that he would ace the 11 plus. Now, when it came to the 11 plus, he actually missed it by one. He was aiming to get into one of the grammar schools in Slough, where the pass mark was and still is 111. He scored 110, the worst score it is possible to get, because you always know you missed it by one. That makes it the worst. It's better to miss it by 10 or 20 marks than to miss it by 1 mark. But he got that score. And I was really surprised, and everybody in his school was really surprised because he was totally expected to ace it. Now, it was a mystery until I spoke to his mum after, and she said it was her fault. And I thought, how can it be your fault? And she explained that in order to try and encourage him to do his best on the day, on the way to him sitting his 11 plus, she said, look, son, just do your absolute best. And as a treat afterwards, we'll take you to Thorpe Park to celebrate your efforts. Whoa, now that sounds like a good idea, but it's totally disastrous. Why? Because during the exam, him, 10-year-old boy, going to Thorpe Park was a real treat, and I think it still is. He was really excited about the prospect of going to Thorpe Park after the exam, and that's where his head was during the exam. So can you see how something so well-intentioned actually backfired? So after so much learning, he was unable to perform. And it's actually astonishing that under the circumstances, he scored 110. In any case, his appeal did succeed, and he did go to grammar school, and he probably did go into medicine as he had aspired to. But look, I've just given you a couple of anecdotes to show you that it isn't in your control. Your child, what they do in the exam, or whether they get to a particular rank, is not in your control. What is in your control? What is in their control? In your control is how you prepare them, how you educate yourself. Being here, you're doing something wonderful for yourself and for your child. What tuition do you choose? What do you prioritize? What do you think is important in terms of learning? Basically all the things I'm covering here today. For your child, it's whether they put their best effort, whether they do all the work that is set to them, whether they, well, I won't preempt something I'm coming to. These things are in their control. The result, the outcome is not the result of the test, that is. So those are not sensible goals, right? So how do you measure success? Well, now, according to Steve Peters, he's the author of the Chimp Paradox. He was a doctor when he wrote that. He's a professor now. Measure success in life by effort and doing your best. Then it is in your hands to succeed and be proud of yourself. Now we come, that was mind management. Now we come to mindset. The second layer in the pyramid of flourishing, mindset. So your mindset, you, mom and dad mindset, can help or hinder you in striving towards your potential and your child in striving towards their potential. So in other words, your mindset is quite important to your child. There are two mindsets, growth and fixed. Growth is the good one. Here's a nice introduction to mindset.
Do you have a growth mindset? How do you think of intelligence? Do you think you're born with a certain level of intelligence that you can't change much? Or do you think it's something you can work on to develop and grow? Many students think that their level of intelligence is fixed, that they can't do much to change it. This can lead them to feeling that they just aren't smart enough to succeed, especially when courses get more challenging. But what if you knew that no matter who you are, through effort and effective strategies, you can develop your level of intelligence? According to Stanford University psychologist Carol Dweck, how we think about our brains actually affects how well we learn. Dweck says that people generally think with one of two different mindsets, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe that their intelligence is fixed at birth and they can't do much to change it. People with a growth mindset believe that their talents, abilities, and intelligence can be developed in different ways. And you may feel like you have a fixed mindset in some ways and a growth mindset in others. For example, you may think with a fixed mindset that you're just not a math person, but you may adopt a growth mindset with writing, music, sports, or another discipline. In fact, scientists who study the brain have found that the brain is like a muscle. It changes and grows in response to what we do. The harder we work using helpful strategies and the more challenges we face, the stronger and smarter the brain becomes. This is because the brain is made up of cells called neurons, which are connected to each other. As we learn, the number of connections between our neurons also grows. As we continue to exercise our brains, the connections between our neurons grow as well. These new and stronger connections help to make us smarter. Scientists call this concept neuroplasticity. Research shows that students who adopt a growth mindset, who believe that their brains can grow and develop through effort and challenges, actually do better in school. For these students, the goal is not to prove what they already know, but rather to learn and grow. Students with a growth mindset view challenges and mistakes not as proof that they aren't smart enough, but as opportunities to become smarter. The good news is that you can develop a growth mindset. You've taken the first step by learning about some of the science that shows you can grow your brain. The next step is to consider your mindset. If you have some areas in which you think you aren't smart, challenge yourself to learn and grow. Why should you bother? Because if you learn to develop your mindset, you'll persist longer with problems. You'll take on harder challenges and stretch your mental muscle more. You won't be as affected by setbacks, and in the end, you'll learn more. And the effects of changing your mindset can stick with you for years, since you're training your brain to think in a new way.
So I hope just on the basis of that alone, it's really obvious that the mindset that you adopt and therefore nurture in your child is so important for your child's flourishing, for their education. Now, if you like that one, you're going to love this one.
So check this out. Carol Dweck and her colleagues wanted to look into the impacts that praise had on children's development. So what they did is they took over 400 fifth grade students from all across the nation, and they did a really simple yet interesting study. Here's how it went down. They gave all the kids a really, really easy nonverbal IQ test. There were 10 questions, and at the end of the test, they praised all the children in one of two ways. The first group was praised for their intelligence. So they said, wow, great job. You must be really smart at this. Now the second group was praised for their effort. So they said, wow, great job. You must have worked really, really hard at this. Now this is a really subtle difference, but the impact it had is incredible. So after praising the kids and getting them divided up into the two groups, they gave them all an option for their next test. The first option was, hey, this next test is going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be a great opportunity to learn and grow. Now, the second option was, this next test will be similar to the first, and you will surely do well on it. Now, the interesting thing is, out of the group that was praised for their intelligence, 67% of them chose the easier option, while 92% of the kids who were praised for their effort chose the harder test. This is unbelievable to think about, how just the subtle difference in the way that they were praised had such an impact. Carol Dweck explains why this happens.
Child or adult hears, oh, you think I'm brilliant and talented. That's why you admire me. That's why you value me. I better not do anything that will disprove this evaluation. As a result, they enter a fixed mindset, they play it safe in the future, and they limit the growth of their talents. Whereas focusing on the strategies they use, the way they're stretching themselves and taking on hard tasks, the intense practice they're doing, those are the kinds of things that say to a child or an older athlete, it's about the process of growth. As a result, they don't feel, oh, if I make a mistake, you won't think I'm talented. They think, oh, if I don't take on hard things and stick to them, I'm not going to grow.
Next, Dweck and her colleagues gave all the kids a really, really difficult test. It was one that they would surely fail, but they wanted to look at how the different kids attacked this challenge. Dweck noticed that the group that was praised for effort worked harder, longer, and actually enjoyed this test more than the group that was praised for their intelligence. This group got really frustrated with this test and had the tendency to give up early. After this artificially induced failure round, all of the kids were given a third and final test. Now, this test was the same level of difficulty as the first one, but check out the results. The group that was praised for their intelligence actually did worse on this test than the first one. Their average score actually dropped by 20%, while the group that was praised for their effort did significantly better, raising their average score by nearly 30%. This is a 50% difference in performance that was caused by a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. This study shows how praise can either make or break a child's development. I mean, we all do it. We all want to be positive with the children we work with. So teachers, coaches, parents are always looking for ways to support their kids and tend to praise them quite a bit. So we need to look at research like this and realize, okay, praise is a good thing and there's nothing wrong with being positive, but we need to be very careful about praising someone's intelligence or abilities and focus more on the process and the effort that they put.
And I add, don't praise results, scores, outcomes, things which are beyond the child's control. The lady who spoke in that clip, Carol Dweck, she's the author of this book, Mindset. So the idea of growth mindset, fixed mindset, was discovered by her, and she wrote this book. And it's such a valuable book. It's totally essential for any parent to be aware of mindset and how to nurture a growth mindset. That, of course, you know what I'm going to say. We issue this book to the parent of every child on the 11 Plus course as part of Education for Parents. So mindset, the second layer of that pyramid of flourishing. Now we come to the third layer, perspective. A healthy perspective or a realistic perspective on your part, you the parent, allows you to apply your energies where they really count for your child. Right, so again, questions, or I like asking lots and lots of questions because this is just what teachers do. Who's your greatest teacher? Now somebody came to your mind, doesn't matter who. I'm just leading you down a particular train of thought. Here's another. What knowledge, beliefs, and abilities were you born with? Now, obviously, you wouldn't remember, but we can think about that. We've seen our children born, and we've seen other people's children born, and we know or have a pretty good idea that actually children have no knowledge whatsoever when they are born. They have no beliefs whatsoever when they are born, and they have few abilities. I mean, you know, apart from the physical ability to eat, to cry, to fill their nappies and such. But probably the greatest ability that we are born with is the ability to learn. That one ability. It makes us very different and from other animals. Now, we all know a lot and what have you, and whatever we do know, whatever we've learned it somewhere. Now, let's come back to that question about who's your greatest teacher and look at weekly hours. In a week, there are 168 hours, 24 times 7, of which, now if you look at your child and how their week is split, let's say your 10-year-old child, typically their weekly hours are split something like this. 30 hours in school, normally about 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, something like that, during term time, obviously. Maybe 3 hours in tuition, some do, some don't. Maybe 56 hours, maybe more. 7 times 8, maybe it's 9 hours, could even be 10 hours a night sleeping. And a few hours doing extracurricular things, whatever it is your child enjoys doing. And that leaves 70 hours when they are not doing any of those things. And if not 70, at least 50 something hours in your care, mum and dad, not doing anything else, but in your care, under your influence. So that might lead you to say that, oh, well, then if our parents are our greatest teachers, wrong. Because out of those 168 hours, yes, your child is spending on average more than 50 hours under your care where they are not doing any particular thing. But they're spending 168 hours in their own company. So in fact, each of us is our own greatest teacher. We spend 100% of our time with ourselves. And that goes for your 10-year-old child too, which is the age children tend to be when they sit their 11+ test. After that, it is our parents. They are our greatest teachers, not only because they have the greatest opportunity to teach and influence us, but because when we are born and before we ever see the nursery door, we've already learned some of the most important things that we'll ever learn in our lives. And that is our mind management, our mindset, and our models of ourselves and the world and our place in it, our perspective. We pick that up from our parents. We're not born with that, or at least not completely. And after that, it is our children who are our greatest teachers. Because one, they remind us what it is to be curious. Because we can forget, we get busy with life, trying to make ends meet, many responsibilities. They question the things we'd rather not have to justify. Sometimes we just want to say, just listen to me, I'm your father or I'm your mother, that's why. They remind us how ignorant we once were and how far we've come. This is a really important one, so I'm going to elaborate a little on it. Sometimes if we're trying to teach our child something, we think it's so simple, why aren't they getting it? And sometimes we feel frustrated. But if we remember that we were born knowing nothing and understanding nothing, and now look at us, how well educated, how knowledgeable we are, that should give us hope that, I should be a bit more patient with my child because there was a time when I didn't know this thing, which I now think is so obvious. And therefore it allows us to be more understanding and patient with our children. Remember how far we have come. And they're not cynical about the world, not yet, and they need never be. It does depend on how you teach them and what you teach them. So now let's talk about flourishing. Flourishing of a person. When a baby is born, their flourishing is not in their hands, it is in the hands of their parents, their carers. They are pretty helpless. And almost 100% of their flourishing is down to the household, the family that's looking after them. By the time we're adults, our flourishing is almost 100% in our own hands. But what about when your child is 10 years old? Well, my best estimate as an average is that your 10-year-old child's flourishing is split 50-40-10. Now 50-40-10, that is between formal education, such as schools and universities, between parents, and between themselves. But who's the 50, who's the 40, and who's the 10? Well, 50% is the self. So by the time your child is 10 years old, I estimate about 50% of their flourishing is in their own hands, regardless of school, regardless of parenting. But 40% is still in the hands of the parents at that age. And 10% is the rest of the world. That is other people, the world in general, and formal education included within that, of which probably formal education is only a couple of percent. That should be sobering, because I can tell you that over the 20-ish years that I've done 11+, a lot of parents have got that quite upside down. And they think it's the school that's going to be the making of their child. And it's nothing of the sort. And they bust a gut about trying to get their child into a grammar school or a particular grammar school, as if that's the thing that's going to, but in fact, that's only 1 or 2% of it. And they disregard the 90%, which is in the hands of themselves and their child. And they're usually, the ones who are thinking like that are actually very far short of making full use of the 90%, which is within the household. And a lot of that 90% is to do with mindset and mind management. And they put their energies and efforts into the couple of percent, which is formal education, and probably a fraction of 1%, which is tuition, which is a complete nonsense. Anyway, to sum that up about perspective, neither the academic flourishing of your child nor their flourishing as a person relies on which school or university they go to. It's down to you and your child, how you raise them. So it's not a disaster if your child doesn't go to a particular school. Pay and absolve. Let me explain, pay and absolve. When I have a mechanical problem with my car, I'm not a mechanic and I'm not that interested in motor mechanics either. I do just take it to the garage and say, look, I'm having this problem with my car. And they'll say, yes, leave it with us, Mr. Taylor. We'll give you a call and give you an estimate. And they do that. And I always say, yes, go ahead, fix it. And then they'll call me to say it's ready and I'll go and pick it up and they'll give me the details of what it was exactly. And they'll show me the part that they have replaced or repaired. And I'll say, yeah. And I'll say, how much is it? And I'll pay and go. I mean, I don't know if that really was the problem. I don't know if the part they showed me really did come out of my car. As long as my car's working, it's fixed, then that's it, I'll pay and go. And so essentially what I'm doing is I'm paying and absolving myself of all further interest or responsibility for this repair. The same happens when I have a problem with my computer. I take it to the computer repair shop and I say, get on with it. Thank you very much, here's your money. Pay and absolve is fine for some things, but it is not fine for education for your 10-year-old child or primary school child. You cannot leave your primary school child with a tutor or a school and leave them to it, because as they say, the overlap between parenting and teaching is too great and your influence is actually far greater than the influence of the school or the tutor. You can't, you have to be involved in it and you have to have a pretty good idea what you're doing, and well done for being here. It is not like leaving your car at a garage or your computer at a repair shop. Okay, so you want the best for your child. This is an assumption I made for the people who have attended here. And it is on that basis I have prepared this presentation. You want the best for your child. Well then, do not compare. Do not compare your child to any other person. It sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Sometimes you compare your child favorably to somebody else. You might say, oh, look, that person isn't doing very well at this, that, or the other, and look at you. And you're doing it in order to try and give your child a boost, but it's not actually a good thing. Or sometimes you're trying to motivate your child by saying, well, look up to your uncle, your grandfather, your cousin, your classmate, this person in the media, your brother, your sister, what have you. And you're trying to motivate them, inspire them to try and get them to do that little bit better. But don't do it. It seems like naturally the right thing to do, but it isn't. Comparison is unkind, and it is often manipulative, and it stifles the human. In other words, it promotes the chimp. It also promotes a fixed mindset. The only person you should try to be better than is the person you were yesterday. In other words, if you want your child to be inspired to do better, to learn more, to apply their efforts more, praise their efforts. Don't praise their cleverness. Don't compare them to somebody else. Compare them to themselves. What do I mean? Well, look, your child might know their times tables up to 10. That's enough, by the way. Don't teach them beyond 10. I know schools are saying 12, but the people who make that policy don't know what they're doing. But if you think 2 years ago, they probably didn't know all their times tables up to 10, or they knew fewer of them. So point that out to them. Oh, do you remember 2 years ago? You didn't know this, or you didn't know that. And look at you now. Then they can see how far they've come, but you have to show them by comparing them to themselves. Because, you know, their growth is imperceptible to them. They don't realize how much they're growing, how much they're learning. And if you point it out to them, then they can see it and they will feel motivated and they will see that it does work and they are learning. And then they believe in their ability to continue growing. So isn't your child a worthy human being in their own right without comparison to anyone else? Don't compare. And I will tell you what the worst comparison of all is. It's the one that comes most naturally to parents, and it is comparison with a brother or a sister. Don't do it. Don't do any comparison. But the worst one of all is comparing to a brother or a sister. So back to that question. So you want the best for your child. What else am I going to tell you? Well, what is best for your child depends on who your child is. Horses for courses. You know and respect their aptitudes, their natural inclinations, and value them for who they are. If you want the best for your child, you have to know what your child is good at, what they are interested in, what they find satisfying, fulfilling, enriching. Here's the thing. Sometimes parents kind of sow a seed in their child's mind and thinking they're doing their child a favor. Again, it's one of those things we do as parents, which is actually unwittingly undermining our child. I'll go back one before I come to that gaudy sentence. In many cultures, it is traditional that if a child shows any academic promise within the family and within the community, the talk is all, oh, they're going to grow up to be a doctor. Now, it's not that being a doctor is a good or a bad thing for that person. I mean, obviously, it's a good thing for the world, thank goodness. We have medical practitioners. No, as a career choice for a particular individual, is it good for them? That depends on who they are. Not everybody is cut out for that. And yet many children have that as sort of set as their destiny by their family before they're old enough to know anything about themselves. And then they go on and follow the profession that their family decided that they were going to follow, thinking they're doing something great for themselves and for their family. And then they wonder why it is they're not happy in their work, why they feel like something's lacking, they don't feel content with their lives. Well, this sentence does shed some light on this. Your child's desire to please you can mislead you into believing that they want what you want for them, causing you to make choices that undermine their flourishing as human beings. Let me unpack that a little, because it's a long sentence. And the reason why it's kind of a light is because this is probably the single most important thing I can tell you. Now, you see, your child has a desire to please you. It isn't always obvious to you, but they do. They look up to you. And what they think you want, they try to please you with that. So if they think you want them to say this, if they think you want them to do that, that's what they do. They want your approval, your praise. So they start mirroring the messages you're giving. So you say, oh, you can grow up to be a doctor. And then they'll come back saying, I want to be a doctor. And you say, oh, do you? And then you help them to be a doctor. And actually, it's all lost. Where did that idea really come from? Was it really the child wanting to be a doctor, or was it you wanting them to be a doctor? By the way, I'm only using a doctor. I'm not saying it's a poor career choice. I'm saying it's a poor career choice unless it's what you're cut out for. So beware, because you might be setting a path for your child, which is not the path of fulfillment for them. Be wary of wishing your child or trying to turn them into someone they aren't. You can't do that without stifling your child's true self. So it's one of those things we do as parents, thinking we're doing our child a service when we're really not. Well then, sometimes parents do this with grammar school. So many parents say, oh, I must get my child into grammar school. They must pass the 11+. They must go to a grammar school. And they haven't asked the question, is grammar school even good for my child? Which seems to me quite an important omission. So who are grammar schools suited to? Who are they good for? Well, I'll tell you who they're not good for. They're not good for 3 out of 4 children. They're in fact terrible, disastrous for most children. Who are they suited to then? Well, The expectations workload in a grammar school are appropriate for children who have high academic potential. How high? Well, roughly the top quarter. So children who are good at learning and who enjoy learning, grammar school can be good for them. Everybody else, please don't send them to a grammar school. Even if somehow you could get them into a grammar school, don't send them there because it's going to be a terrible place for them. You might not understand why. I'm going to briefly explain. For other children, grammar schools are likely to be overwhelming and damaging, disastrous, I say. I'll tell you why. Because if a child somehow gets into a grammar school when they are not good at learning and they don't love learning, one, they're going to be overwhelmed with work because the workload and the pace of learning is set for children who are especially academic, and a child will feel overwhelmed and feel pretty stupid. And they will also feel stupid, which means it will damage their self-esteem, their opinion of themselves, which matters much more than anyone else's opinion of them, as you know, because they will come bottom in just about everything, in all subjects throughout the rest of their childhood. And you can imagine the kind of damage that does to a person. Any parent who wants that for their child, I think, isn't asking the right questions, like, is grammar school even good for my child? And who are grammar schools suited to? So if your child is not particularly good at learning, don't send them to a grammar school. If your child does not enjoy learning, don't send them to a grammar school. Now, sometimes when I do this presentation live, which I haven't done since COVID, I ask, so what do you think is most important when you're preparing your child for 11+? And these are some of the answers I get. Whether it's a CEM test or a GL test, the pattern of the test format, that's a favorite. Exam techniques and speed, more favorites. Oh, it's vocabulary list, reading the right books, flashcards for vocabulary, synonyms and antonyms, lots and lots of practice. Or comprehension, practice at comprehension. Mocks, lots of mocks. Maybe some of you think these are some of the most important things. Well, those people are mistaken, and you are mistaken if you think these are the most important things preparing for 11+. I'm not saying that some of those things are not important. Definitely some of them are no-nos, like word lists, vocabulary lists, reading lists, not a good idea. Practice at comprehension is important. Mocks are important. Practice is important. Exam techniques and speed are important. But none of these things are anywhere near the most important things when preparing for 11+. So let's come to 11+ stuff. What really is most important? I'm going to come back to the same slide. Well, I've got news for you. What most people won't tell you, because they don't realize it, which is that everything in 11+ is simple. I'm talking about the subjects themselves. Non-verbal reasoning is simple. Verbal reasoning is simple. Maths is simple. Everything in 11+ is simple, except English. English is not simple. And probably the main thing that makes other subjects not simple is the English aspect. English is a language. Languages are not simple. Languages are complex. Languages are huge. Languages are sophisticated. And a language cannot be learned by a few hours a week in a room. That's not the way language is learned. It's too sophisticated, too complex to be learned like that. It can only be learned by immersion over a lifetime. The kind of mastery that you need for the purpose of the test, like 11+. So the only thing in 11+ that isn't simple is English. And most people lose sight of that. They lose sight of it because nobody's telling them that, except me. Because other tutors are telling them, oh, it's vocabulary. You have to learn the list of words. It's mocks. Guess why they're saying mocks? Because they make lots of money from foolish people who put their kids in for lots and lots of mocks because they're being told it's mocks that's important. CEM, GL, it's critical. No, it isn't. Because they're testing the same things. They're just different organizations setting the exam. So what is this CEM, GL thing? Why do most grammar schools disclose the name of the organization that sets the test papers? And why do they disclose the outline format of the test papers? Because that information doesn't help you at all. It's trivial information. They are actually testing the same skills and knowledge. That's why they tell you. And so do all other organizations testing at 11+. They're testing the same skills and the same knowledge. Those are what we call red herrings, distractors from what is really important for children to be learning. So what is being tested in the 11+ test? Well, literacy, reasoning with language, the language being British English, and this is about 75% of the 11+ test. Now, I know there are lots and lots of 11+ tests, but I can't think of an 11+ test which is less than 75% a test of children's mastery of English. Some are more. Now you might say, oh, but wait a minute, the exam for SLAU has 3 subjects: verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, and non-verbal reasoning. So surely English is only a third of it. Or for, say, reading, there's an English paper and a maths paper. So English is only 50% of it, and so on. We'll come back. Then there's numeracy, reasoning with quantities, knowledge of maths, skill with numbers, problem-solving skills. If there's non-verbal reasoning, then spatial or pictorial skills, reasoning with shapes, knowledge of shapes, observation, spatial skill. The ability to understand and follow instructions. Speed is being tested. I'll come back to that as well. And ultimately, the ability to perform well in tests. Some children have a knack for it, and some don't. Some fall apart when it comes to just because of the word test. So let's come back to why is it then English is actually 75% at least of 11+ tests. Well, I'm going to tell you this. Some children are brilliant at number crunching, but they don't do very well in 11+ maths. Why? Because their English is not very good. So they've developed fantastic number crunching skills, but they neglected to develop the most important subject of all, which is English. As a result of which, they don't understand the information given, and they don't understand the question well enough. Because problem solving is actually comprehension, and comprehension is English. So they're not very good at it. So at least half the marks in any maths paper are for mastery of English, at least half. The only bits which aren't are the number crunching bits, which any idiot can do. Any idiot can do number crunching. And some children think that they're really ready for maths because they're good at number crunching, and many parents reinforce that same message. And some tutors do too. Instructions. All the instructions on the paper itself, the test paper, are in English. All the spoken instructions given on the day of the test are in English. They must be understood and they must be followed. That's another big aspect of the test, which relies on English. So you can see it's easily 75% of any 11+ test. It's a test of the children's mastery of English, the most neglected subject. Speed. What is speed? Speed comes from confidence. If a child is confident in what they're doing, then they can work quickly. Confidence comes from understanding the concepts, understanding the methods, and having practiced them. And understanding comes from learning, being taught, having asked the questions, having answered questions. And learning comes from learning resources, teaching, not practice. So speed is a symptom of having learned well. And you cannot learn well in a large group. To learn well, it has to be a highly interactive lesson, which can only be done in a small group. It isn't about practice, practice, practice. It's about learn, learn, learn. Practice comes later. So this is what's being tested. What is needed in order to prepare for a test like that? Well, access to an excellent syllabus, which we provide, obviously. They need to be taught well. Now, on my programs, I do all the teaching because I'm the subject matter expert. I'm the author of the course. I'm the person best qualified to teach it, and haven't been in the world of education since 1985. So I teach that, and I record myself teaching it, so that not only does your child have access to 100% of the teaching of the syllabus by me, but so do you. Children need to be asked questions. That makes them think. And they need to be able to ask questions. And these things can only be done, or are best done, in a small group format. Small group, meaning less than 10. They need guidance about their learning needs. You need guidance about your child's learning needs and what you can do to support those learning needs. Again, you need a small group in order to identify each pupil's learning needs. Scores in tests are not enough. They only point to some things. They need suitable practice resources. This is a commodity. You can get suitable practice resources anywhere and in huge quantities. My numbering went astray there, sorry. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I've got 3, 4 again. They need someone to turn to when they have questions, apart from mum and dad. On our courses, we set aside time during the lesson for the children to ask questions. In fact, we insist that they write their questions down on a query sheet. And above all, they need your support. And you need someone to educate and guide you in how to support your child's learning. I am at your service. Thank you for attending. So, since English is the most important subject by far in 11 plus, how to improve mastery of English? Well, it isn't in a room. It's actually at home and all around. Children should or could read daily from a variety of sources, a total of at least 30 minutes, preferably an hour a day when there is no school. Read a mixture, fiction and non-fiction, every day. When reading fiction, read different genres, different authors. Vary the non-fiction, could be encyclopedias, newspapers, magazines, internet articles, and so on. Insist that your child speaks in sentences, expresses themselves clearly and accurately, and don't finish their sentences for them. Let me briefly elaborate a little on this. Children generally do not get practice at speaking in sentences. This handicaps them severely when it comes to expressing themselves and when it comes to creative writing, because they find it difficult to form sentences, because they haven't practiced it. Why don't they practice it? I'll tell you why. Because they spend the bulk of their time at home with you, and you are mum and dad and brother and sister, and maybe granddad, granny, maybe others. And we all understand one another without having to express ourselves properly, so we don't. You see, this is the way it works in homes, in households, in families. We don't need to express ourselves fully and clearly because we are understood. The same is true for school, because most of the speaking that children do in school is with their friends. And it's the same situation with their friends. They have their own language. They understand one another without using proper English, without speaking in sentences. So actually, children get very little practice at speaking in sentences, either at home or in school. And as a result, they have a lot of difficulty expressing themselves in sentences and clearly and accurately. and they have a lot of difficulty with creative writing. So you can help them a lot. It's quite empowering for a child to learn to express themselves well. It's much better to learn words in context, i.e. words you come across during your varied daily reading, because then you understand how that word is used. So the usage, not just the dictionary definition. Learning words from a vocabulary list, some people will give you a vocabulary list. If you do, I recommend you shred it. They tell you they're doing you a favor, but they're actually doing the exact opposite. Again, I'll elaborate on that because lots of people will be offended by this. Word lists are not a good idea. Flashcards, vocabulary, flashcards that you can buy are a deception, just like vocabulary lists are a deception, and for the same reason. The English language has over 1 million words, of which the vast majority are archaic or highly technical, and they're no longer used they're not in general usage. There are about 173,000 words which are still in general usage. Of them, the average adult knows between 20 and 35,000 words. So a very well-educated adult would only know perhaps a quarter of the English language, a very well-educated adult. So you can imagine that a very well-educated 10-year-old might know perhaps up to 20,000 words, which, as you can see, is a drop in the ocean when there are 173,000, just over, words which are in current usage in English. So, and any of them could be in the exam. So somebody might give you 10,000 word list, vocabulary list, or 20,000 words, and your child might diligently sit down and learn all of those and think that they've got vocabulary covered when they haven't got vocabulary covered at all. So it's a deception and it's wasted effort. It's much better to learn words organically as you come across them and to do lots and lots of varied daily reading in order, well, it has so many benefits, I won't even try to list them. Learn a few words every day, few new words every day, rather than trying to learn 100 on a Sunday. And you, that is mom and dad, can develop your own English and vocabulary. There's no end to it. There's nobody who just knows too many words. Not even the greatest professor of English, not even William Shakespeare himself, knew all of English. And here's the thing, you might be telling your child, oh, you know what, reading is the very best thing for you, which it is. More important than everything else in 11 class, which it is. But you know what? Do your children ever see you reading, mom, dad? Be a good role model of learning, reading, mind management, and a growth mindset. Don't say, do as I say, not as I do. You can't get away with that. Your child will look at you and say, well, if it's good enough for mom, it's good enough for me. If you want your child to believe in persevering with efforts to learn, let them see a worthy example to follow. You must persevere with efforts to learn. If you're telling your child learning is important, then show them. So what do you look for when choosing tuition? Well, it should optimize learning, not testing, not practice, not books, learning resources. The group needs to be small, 10 or less, so that there is a lot of interacting, a lot of room for questions, asking and answering of, so a lot of room for observing the learning need of each pupil or learning needs of each pupil, a lot of feedback and guidance. Some of the homework needs to be marked by the tutor because it gives a unique insight into your child's work and their tendencies and strengths and learning needs. And, you know, everybody's good. They say they're good anyway. But do they back it up? Or is it just words? These are some red flags, i.e. if you see these things, run when you're seeking tuition. If there are more than 12 people in a room, it isn't about education. If they give a pre-test before accepting pupils, they don't believe in their own ability to teach your child, because they're only going to take children who are at a particular level already. If the tutor does not mark the homework, some of the homework. If you yourself don't have access to the learning, you have one hand tied behind your back, mom or dad, because you are in the greatest position to teach your child. Not just about mindset and mind management, which of course is primarily your responsibility, but even syllabus work. The focus, if the focus is on testing instead of learning, or on volume of work, i.e. resources, books, publications, rather than on the quality of work and the learning. If they are bigging up, i.e. stoking up hype about techniques, exam techniques, test scores, CEM, GL, test formats, mocks, what they're doing is taking your eye off the ball, which is the actual learning, the underlying learning that's being tested in the exams, because they're not paying enough attention to that. Run amok. So here's a little plug. Our courses, that is Sir Taylor's courses, are based on the values and insights shared in this presentation. We use highly interactive small group format. We work at optimizing our collaboration with you. You have access to 100% of the syllabus teaching, which is done by me via video lessons. You have access to all the scores that the tutor collects. The tutor marks some of your child's homework where they are showing their understanding of the syllabus. You have access to an individual learning plan written by the tutor, where they point out your child's learning needs and how they can be supported, progress that your child makes. The flagship 11 Plus course is so effective. Remember, it's been running over 20 years now. It comes with a money back guarantee. I don't know anybody else who's good enough at teaching, at structuring a course to do that. They're too busy trying to make money and succeeding. Foundation course is an excellent stepping stone. So this is for children who are in year 4. It's an excellent stepping stone to the 11 Plus course. It's a foundation for the 11 Plus. Live lessons are running in various locations, currently Feltham, Hounslow, Cranford, Langley, Slough, and at a computer near you via Zoom. Which brings us to, should your child have their live lessons via Zoom or in a room? So I'll just quickly address that. Live lessons, first of all, are a minority of the learning that takes place on the program. I would say 20% at most, and the other 80% is the same, whether they're attending their live lesson in a room or via Zoom. Again, it's to do with perspective. Many parents are so obsessed with, but what about the live lesson, live lesson, live lesson? And they forget that's a minority of the child's learning. And then they are not really paying attention to the other 80%. There are differences, and I'll come to them. Pupils can participate in live lessons in a room or via Zoom. It is the same lesson. They're both small groups, highly interactive. But via Zoom, you have the convenience and safety of lessons from home. You save money in travel. You save time getting ready, taking your child to and from, waiting to sign your child out or sign your child in. These are better for some children. They're better for children who feel vulnerable away from home for whatever reason. Room, the tutor has greater scrutiny of the children and their work, and there are fewer potential distractions when you're in a room, whether it's a school, community center, or a hotel. They are better for children with concentration issues. For most children, room or Zoom, either way, works really well. So that is not the critical thing for most children. So here's a fair question. Since the Sir Taylor 11 Plus course is straightforward and the Sir Taylor system is so effective, why doesn't every pupil who goes through this qualify in 11 Plus? This is a question that I've been asked many times. Well, first thing to understand about 11 Plus is that it is the key design feature that it is a selection test. What they're doing is they're setting the paper such as to try and spread the children's scores out from the lowest to the highest, with the majority somewhere in the middle, which is like the normal distribution. and then they'll take the top 25%, meaning by definition, at least 3 out of 4 children don't pass. So it doesn't matter how much you embrace a growth mindset, some children are not going to be in the top quarter, no matter how well they're taught and how well they work. But most times it's not to do with their potential, it's to do with poor mind management skills. They were driven by how they felt, i.e. by their chimp, by emotion, by only working when they felt like it, not being able to complete their work because they weren't in the mood, and their parents were unable to motivate them or to help them to put it into perspective. Poor mind management skills. Fixed mindset. They were valuing scores. They were being defensive about what they already knew, and they were not embracing everything as a learning opportunity. Often this is learned from parents who look at the scores and make judgments based upon that, rather than valuing learning, process, and effort. Fixed mindset, severe handicap to children's learning. Lack of a foundation. Usually lack of English, that they come in the last 2 years to come to do the foundation course or the 11 plus course, and they haven't been paying attention to mastering English in the first 8 years of their lives. Language, it can't be learned rapidly. Not this kind of mastery of language. Lack of a foundation. And it's not always just in English, it's lack of foundation in general knowledge, the stuff that children pick up by paying attention to their lives, by paying attention to the world, by doing lots of varied reading. They haven't been doing these things. Lack of parental support and involvement. Now that, I'm not having a dig at parents, not every parent is in a position to do that, but certainly those children whose parents are involved, they are in a position to gain that little bit more. And for reasons I already explained or shared a couple of examples of, they just had a bad day. There is nothing anybody can do about that. In the end, the grammar school is wrong for them, and thank goodness they didn't get through. In other words, it's a result. And I would encourage you to understand that if a child gets into grammar school, then great. They've proved that it's the right thing for them. And if they don't get into grammar school, they miss out, think, thank goodness they didn't, because they're not cut out for grammar school. So it's a win-win. And along the route, preparing for grammar school, they will have learned a massive amount and given themselves a huge boost, their education a huge boost. If they were taught, as long as it was about learning and not about scores. Right, but back to the questions I asked you at the beginning, and now I think you will have answered them for yourself, but I'll just give a quick summary anyway. So are you getting in the way of your child's education? Well, I don't know, but possibly. Well, what do you praise your child for? If you're praising your child for making the effort, for following the processes, for diligently applying themselves, then that's great. But if you're praising them for getting the medal, for winning the race, for getting the score, getting recognition, no, not for their intelligence. These are not good things. Who do you compare them to? Well, if you're comparing them to anybody other than themselves, you are getting in the way of your child's education. What about feelings? Are you teaching your child that they are not their feelings? What proportion of education do you believe occurs in schools? Well, I'm telling you, probably 1 or 2%. And the rest of education is, or the vast bulk of education is actually between you and your child. And are you giving due attention to that? If not, then maybe you are getting in the way of your child's education. Is grammar school good for your child? Well, I think I've made that very clear. They need to first be particularly good at learning and interested in it. Then grammar school will be good for them. And if they are, what is important for their learning? And I gave a long list of what parents think is important that isn't, and what really is important, which is developing a really great mastery of English. And the prime means of doing that is through lots of varied daily reading. So here's a summary of my presentation. Flourishing requires effective mind management and a growth mindset. The healthy perspective, 50-40-10, 50% the child themselves at age 10, 40% you, mom and dad, 10% the rest of the world, of which a small percentage is schools and a teeny percentage is tuition. Logic, language, and a love of learning are prerequisites. Choose small group, highly interactive tuition, where the tutor does some of the marking. Lots of engagement, lots of learning, rather than testing resources, practice resources. Learning resources are the ones that matter. You can book now for the current, that is the 2021/22 Sir Taylor 11+ course. That is for children who are now in year 5, or the foundation course, which is for children who are now in year 4. That course began only a couple of weeks ago. The 11+ course has been underway for 5 weeks. Our live lessons are conducted in small, highly interactive groups. There is coaching for you. I'm doing some now, as well as for your child. You both have access to 100% of the syllabus teaching. You and your child have 24/7 access to the teaching, scores, schedule, and the individual learning plan, ILP. Someone to turn to for help, whatever kind of query you have, whether it's administrative, whether it's to do with your child's particular difficulty, or something broader about 11+, there is someone to turn to within the company. A proven, for just over 20 years, values-driven program. Values-driven should really matter. What's not to like? Come on. We have an autumn offer. If you haven't already joined our course and you join, then you will be eligible for the autumn offer. Your child will have missed the beginning of the course, and that's quite important that they catch up. And in order to help them to catch up, we are going to waive the charge for the worksheets that we have issued and the video lessons. Those are the ones I referred to where I am teaching the syllabus, so that they can catch up for free. The only thing you would pay for are the books that we have issued, and your child will need those. So we are waiving the charge for the worksheets issued this term before your child joins, and the video lessons too. You can call us 7 days a week between the hours of 12 noon and 3 p.m. You can secure your child's place on one of our courses. You can put their name down even over the phone and follow that up with a written application via our website. You can book a free Zoom call with me. Call us up. I do these Zoom calls a couple of evenings a week. You may need to wait sometimes, because sometimes my schedule is busy with it booked up ahead of time, but I'd love to meet you. You will qualify for the autumn offer if you join late, and we are available, as I mentioned, 7 days a week. Now, if you think I've said something that's interesting or useful to you or your child, then do not keep a good thing to yourself. Spread the word, tell others. These days, it's really hard for a voice to be heard. I don't know if you might have noticed, if you're in business, you almost certainly have noticed that some companies are spending a fortune on marketing, all kinds of marketing, but especially social media. And it's very difficult for anybody to stand out and be heard. And your word of mouth is really important. Tell your friends and relations about Sir Taylor's uniquely values-based education. Give us a mention in your social media. We're not run for the purpose of accumulating profit, but to provide the best possible education and guidance that we can. Does this even matter to you? Lots of people, somehow it doesn't matter. Here's an end thought. Every parent has the chance to make the world a better place by the example they set for their children. What's the alternative? Thank you so much for attending.